We're going to talk about a moment in history that shows how even a happy occasion, a royal wedding, could just completely spiral into a nightmare.
Yeah, it's a pretty stark lesson.
It really is. It
Hmm.
shows how political fear and religious hatred can, well, violently reshape an entire country. We're talking about the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre.
In 16th century France.
So to even begin to get what happened, you have to realize that France at this time was, it was the tinderbox ready to explode.
Absolutely. The whole continent was in the middle of the Protestant Reformation, and France was just ripped in two.
On one side, you had the huge majority, the Catholics, and on the other, you had this growing group of French Protestants. They were called the Huguenots.
And this wasn't just about, how you pray. It was about power. Think of it like two giant rival political parties that also happen to believe the other side is going to hell.
So they were fighting over everything. Who gets the throne, who makes the laws.
Exactly. And for decades, they'd fought these brutal civil wars, signed peace treaties, and then almost immediately broken them. The trust was just, well, it was gone.
Okay, so who's in charge of all this chaos? Officially, it's King Charles IX.
Right, but he's young. The real power, the person pulling all the strings behind the scenes, is his mother, Catherine de' Medici.
And her main goal was just keeping her family, the Valois dynasty, on the throne, whatever it took.
And you had all these powerful, noble families swirling around them. On the Protestant side, you have Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, a brilliant military leader, and a young prince, Henry of Navarre.
And on the Catholic side,
The Guise family, they were incredibly powerful, super Catholic, and they saw it as their mission from God to, wipe out Protestantism in France.
so when you say tensions were high, you mean these guys were basically in a Cold War for the king's attention.
What a very hot Cold War, yeah. So
Yeah.
the royal family, they're desperate for a solution. They're just sick of the fighting.
And they come up with this huge political gamble, a wedding.
Exactly. It was a total Hail Mary pass. The idea was to marry the king's sister, Margaret a Catholic, to Henry of Navarre, who was a leading Protestant prince.
The thinking was, if we unite these two big families, the Valois and the Bourbons, maybe we can stop the fighting for good.
And it was sold as this grand symbol of unity. To see it, thousands of Protestants, important ones, nobles, soldiers, all traveled to Paris for the wedding in August of 1572.
Okay, but Paris is a very, very Catholic city.
Incredibly so. You have to picture this. Thousands of people who the locals see as heretics, as enemies, are suddenly flooding their streets. The atmosphere was poisonous.
So this wedding of the century felt more like a trap to them.
Too many, yeah. They saw it as the king betraying his Catholic faith.
And on top of all that, it was a boiling hot August.
Right, which never helps tempers. And
Yeah.
food prices were sky high, so the ordinary people of Paris were already angry and struggling. You just have this restless Catholic mob watching their enemies celebrate at the palace.
It really was a ticking time bomb.
A very volatile situation for everyone, but especially for the Huguenots, who are now all gathered inside the city walls.
And that bomb goes off just 4 days after the wedding. This is where it all goes wrong.
So fast.
The most important Protestant leader, Admiral Coligny, the one guy who could really rally the Protestant armies, he's walking down the street.
And suddenly a gunshot from a window.
The assassin misses a kill shot, but Coligny is hit. He's wounded in his hand and his arm.
And this just sets off an earthquake. The Huguenot nobles, who were promised they'd be safe, they completely panic.
They storm straight to the king.
They do. They gather around their wounded leader and demand justice. They tell King Charles, "You find who did this now." And crucially, they threaten to get revenge themselves if the king doesn't act.
So what the royal family hears isn't a plea for justice.
No. They hear an army inside their city threatening to start a new war right on their doorstep.
Catherine de' Medici especially becomes convinced the Huguenots are about to launch a coup,
Yeah.
an uprising to take over the government.
Right. They're terrified. So Catherine and a small group of her advisors meet in secret, and their plan shifts from defense to offense.
They go to the young King Charles,
Mhm.
and they convince him that the only way to save the kingdom, to stop a civil war, is to strike first.
But, and this is a really important point, the initial plan was for a targeted strike, a political assassination.
Not a massacre.
No, not at all. The idea was to kill maybe a dozen or so key Huguenot military leaders, cut the head off the snake, so to speak, and prevent a bigger war.
But the king, He hesitated. I mean, these were guests at his own sister's wedding. They were there under his protection.
He really struggled with it.
Yeah.
The reports say he paced for hours arguing with them, but his mother and the council just backed him into a corner.
They told him it was either them or us.
They said, if we wait, they'll kill us all. And finally, in this moment of just extreme panic and fear, the king supposedly yells, then kill them all so that no one is left to blame me.
And that single order just opened the floodgates.
The signal was set for the early hours of August 24th, St. Bartholomew's Day.
At night, the bell of a church near the palace, Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois, starts to ring.
And that's the signal. Catholic soldiers and city militias hit the streets immediately.
Their first target is Admiral Coligny.
Right away. They break into his room, murder him in his bed, and throw his body out the window to the mob below.
And what's so terrifying is how fast it escalates. The royal plan was just for the leaders.
But the moment those bells rang, all that pent-up hatred from the Parisian Catholics it exploded. The city gates were locked so no one could get out.
And the mobs just started going house to house.
Yeah, hunting for anyone they thought was a Protestant. It wasn't just nobles anymore. It was men, women, children, anyone.
It turned into a riot. People were stealing things, settling old scores. It was chaos.
Total chaos. The reports say the Seine River was literally red with blood and filled with bodies. This was so far beyond what the Royal Council had planned.
The government had lit the match and then completely lost control of the fire.
And while all this is happening, King Charles is trying to spin the story.
He goes public and takes responsibility, but he lies about why. He says he only ordered the executions to stop a Huguenot plot against him.
Right, he frames it as saving the state. But the mobs aren't listening to him anymore. He orders them to stop, and they just ignore him. It takes days to get any kind of control back in Paris.
And the violence doesn't just stay in Paris.
No, as the news slowly spreads across the country, the same thing happens in other cities. Lyon, Rouen, Orléans.
So this wasn't just a Paris thing. The whole country was divided.
Exactly. Thousands more were killed in the provinces, and the reaction from the rest of Europe just showed how deep that divide was.
Protestant countries were horrified. Queen Elizabeth I in England apparently wore black in mourning.
But the Catholic leaders, they celebrated. The Pope had a special medal made to commemorate the event. The King of Spain was supposedly thrilled. It just poured fuel on the fire of the Reformation across the entire continent.
For the Huguenots in France, the loss was devastating. Almost all their top leaders were gone.
Many of them converted to Catholicism just to survive. Others fled the country entirely, which was actually a big economic blow to France, a real brain drain.
But in the end, the massacre totally backfired as a political move.
Oh, completely. It didn't bring peace. It did the exact opposite. It guaranteed another war. The Fourth War of Religion started almost immediately.
All that trust between the monarchy and a huge part of its own population was just shattered.
And here's the real irony. The one person they really should have been worried about, the one who survived it all.
Henry of Navarre, the groom.
The groom himself. He was forced to convert to save his skin, but he eventually escaped. And years later, that same man becomes King Henry IV of France.
And he knew something had to change.
He knew that if this religious warfare continued, France would just tear itself apart. So he does something amazing.
He converts to Catholicism for good, famously saying Paris is worth a mass to unite the country. But he doesn't forget where he came from.
No, he doesn't. He signs one of the most important laws in French history, the Edict of Nantes.
And this wasn't just another truce.
Not at all. This was a law that granted Huguenots actual rights. The right to worship, the right to hold public office, even their own fortified towns for protection.
It was basically state-sponsored religious tolerance, a radical idea for the time.
It was a direct response to the massacre. It was Henry's way of trying to make sure that toxic mix of political fear and religious hatred could never, ever boil over like that again.
So the massacre is remembered not just for the horror, but because it was a turning point. It forced France to realize that tolerance, not murder, was the only way to survive as a nation.
And that's a lesson that, still echoes today.
See you next time.